show's gonna start. But Daren, you know that like ASMR thing that people talk about on the internet where you talk really quietly and it draws a lot of attention?
I don't know what that is, Dano.
Okay, but the people do this thing where they talk really, really quiet.
Like they have something really important to say.
Yeah, and I do have something important to tell you. Okay. But I don't want to draw a lot of attention because this episode, we're going to talk about the election.
Oh, wow, you're brave.
Welcome to It's All Money. Your hosts are right here in front of you. We're checking out It's All Money.
Hey, welcome inside the Sonoma Wealth Conference Room just off the Sonoma Square on It's All Money, our podcast about money. I'm joined by Daren, Blonski, CFP, AIF, other designations, other
ABC Abacadabra.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Dano Weir. I'm the marketing director for Sonoma Wealth and the host of the show. And Daren, we are going to talk about the election today.
That's brave of us, Dano. That is very brave of us. But there's a lot to say. But it's also a delicate discussion because there's a whole lot of people who are really upset because this is only 2 days after the election when we're talking about this. A whole lot of people that were really upset. I think, is it 2 or is it 3 already?
It's Friday, November 8th, 2024, as we record this.
So it's 3.
And as we often do with many of our episodes, not only do we say this is for educational purposes only, but in particular today, Daren's right. There's a lot of people who are feeling a certain way, one way or the other, as a result of the election. And today, we are going to look at how this might affect your portfolio and the economy only. There are other implications for who is or isn't elected president. There's a lot of social implications. There's geopolitical implications. But for the purposes of this episode, we decided we wanted to look at how this might affect the market.
That's right. The market and or your portfolio. And regardless of your politics, how do you look at this from an investment standpoint, right? So we want to frame it correctly here.
That is something that happens. You've been a financial advisor for a long time. You've been through a number of elections.
I have.
Clients probably come to you in the heat of the moment, in the pre or post-election, and say, I want to do X.
In fact, Tuesday night, I got quite a few emails of people starting to show anxiety for how the election was turning out. And the spoiler alert is we just don't know, and we're going to show you all the evidence of that, and it's best to do nothing. That's not advice, but it's best to sit tight.
So the title of today's episode is Portfolios Don't Care Who's President. We'll start with a study from CNBC via the financial services group Empower that they did before the election, showing that 50% of Americans believe the result of the 2024 election will directly affect their personal finances. They also said that 99% of those people in that survey, 99% of people in a Gallup survey said the economy was at least somewhat important in influencing their vote for the next president. So I start the show with that to say there is an impression that the president and their decisions has a massive effect on what's going to happen to the market and the economy. But as we'll show today, maybe not true, maybe not in the way that you think.
Well, and I think the thing is, too, is it will even show this evidence that is maybe not the way you think, and will show that it usually doesn't matter as much who the president is. There's always this, I guess, there's always this desire to say this time is different, right? And we might argue this time might be a little different, but the reality is most of the time it's not.
So if you're freaking out about your investments, if you're freaking out about your portfolio, that's who today is for.
We're overly excited about your portfolio, right?
It's
both sides. Like it's.
And let's say a couple of those. So what are some of the common misconceptions? What are some of the common conclusions that people are drawing as a result of Trump winning the election? I would say that Bitcoin is going to do really well, that all electric car makers are going to do really bad, and that big tech is going to do really bad.
Well, and I think you could also throw in there with the RFK stuff going on that all these processes.
Pharma is going to go through the floor.
That's right. And that Kellogg has to redo all their cereals and get all the dyes out of it. Like, so that's going to have an impact, and it very well might. Like, what's true about this what appears to be this new group of people coming in? Because Trump's old, but a lot of the people he's bringing under him. Because if you look at his first presidency, he brought in a lot of what we call the neocons, and the neocons are these extremely conservative, very politically opinionated group of people that, quote unquote, deep stated the world, right? And this time he's bringing in a lot of the tech bros. And that's, I think that remains the big question, at least in my head. Will this time be different because they might actually do something this time? I don't know. I lean more towards, though, they're not going to do much, right? Like what happens is, yeah, sure, the Republicans won the executive branch. They won the Senate and the House, and they've got the Supreme Court. But at some point, like those groups start interfighting, right? So they think, oh, we're going to get all this done.
You're not conservative enough.
Right. Like, and you start having people peel off to either party, which then slows down the legislative process and slows down progress. Now, maybe. We don't know, right? And now I do think that the Trump administration is going to hit it hard and fast this time because they've been through it once and they know the game. And they really only have a year and a half, let's be real, until we hit the next election cycle to get done whatever they want to get done. And if they go too far, the American people are going to put the brakes on them. That's why I'm always an advocate. We hope. We don't know. But like, I think it's fair to say that it's going to be more like it's been, right? And we tend to see deviations from the center.
You're talking about economically?
Economically, I think politically. I think we should expect more of the same of what we have, but maybe a slight deviation one way or the other. I don't think you're going to get this revolutionizing moment in America that they're professing at this moment. That would be the anomaly for that to happen. Making extreme decisions about your portfolio one way or the other is probably not a good idea, right? And in fact, if we look back in history, we see that like oil, for example, did better during the Biden administration because they constrained supply than in the Trump administration when they said, drill, baby, drill. So it can be
oil from a price standpoint on the market, right? Not necessarily gas prices.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, let's take a look at the S&P 500. We've got that here. This is for our podcast audience. We're in the conference room. We're looking at the screen now, and we've got a slide on the wall, and it is market performance by presidential party. This is the S&P 500, the CAGR. Daren, you know what that is?
I think for sake of yes, but I think for sake of the podcast, it's not worth the explanation. So
it's the performance of the market,
right? More or less, but we would be getting way too far in the technicals for the podcast.
Okay.
I think the way to just look at this is, what's been the performance of the market and through the presidents.
So we've got a list of presidents from Eisenhower to Biden, and the list we're showing percentages of who's done well in the market, how the market has done under that presidency, and for the most part, it's positive.
Yeah, it's positive, and I think this is the thing that I think a lot of people miss with the presidents and with elections is, Trump actually has a really hard job ahead of him because the market's done pretty well over the past few years, and it's pretty high. And if the market falls at all, that's going to show to him. But really, if we just look at the market goes in cycles, and it just so happens that it doesn't necessarily perfectly follow the presidential cycle, right? So if President Trump is going to inherit a really high market, he's got to keep that market going. And he's probably going to keep that market going through printing money. But guess what? Had Kamala won, the way she was going to keep that market going, printing money,
yeah.
So the 800-pound gorilla, quote unquote, in the room is who's going to print money, and they're both going to print money because none of them are dumb enough to stop printing money. Because the minute you stop printing money, guess what? Wheels come off the bus. This whole thing blows up. So they're both going to print, baby, print, right? Uncle Pal's just going to start printing that money, right? It's rounded up, and that's going to push the markets, the economy, all of it up. None of them can stop. So both Kamala and Trump, they are populist presidents. Now, they try to appeal to different sets of idealisms and values, and that's the difference, and we're not going to get into that in this episode. The point is they're both going to print, and they both would have printed, and they're both going to stimulate the economy, and they're both going to keep pushing that market higher. And as you can see, it doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans through history. So inflation and unemployment rate. You know what those are? Simple, right? Does it cost more to buy bread? And do you have a job? And can you get a job if you want a job, right? Government plays with these numbers all the time, messes with the statistics. I'm here to tell you that I guess I should say that carefully, but the government shares information with us that's in its best interest to share with us when it shares it.
You mean like sharing jobs data and then coming back and saying like, well, let's do a little edit on that.
Yeah, like the jobs data is a perfect example because jobs data is historically very noisy. Like, oh, the jobs are way up, and then they'll come edit last job report and say, oh yeah, by the way, it wasn't really up as high as I thought it was. So yeah, I think that is a good example. So what this is chart's looking at is what's the inflation rate and the unemployment rate, and did it matter through the president, Democrat, Republican? And you can see, you look at that and you're just like, well, yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of difference, but nothing.
There's no market difference between the two policies. We're looking at a graph, and we've got 20% inflation and unemployment rate during the 70s, probably the gas crisis there, right? And that's a Republican. That's Nixon probably, and then
78 there. So you had Carter. I think those are the Carter years that's when we saw interest rates go up really high. That's why he got kicked out of office.
Mm-hmm. And then as you have transfer of power in 2016 between Obama and Trump, it's about flat. I mean, it's low unemployment, low inflation.
But it shoots up in 22 there, probably because of inflation shooting up because the war is going on. We had all the COVID money printing.
Yeah.
But it's also looking at unemployment rate, and the unemployment rate has been really low. But the thing is, if you read under the data from the unemployment rate, what's been happening is the Biden administration was most of the employment coming out was coming from the government. It was fiscal stimulus, right? So they're just hiring lots of government workers, and then unemployment stays low. So government does do things to support its power and continue its power, right? Like
in both parties.
Both parties. That's the point. Like, it's like everyone saying, oh, we're going to all die because Republicans won, or oh, we're going to die because Democrats won. It's just not the case, and it's not what history's shown. Now, does that mean tomorrow it's changed and we're going to be different this time? Possible. It's always possible, but it's not probable.
According to this data set, and this is coming from Visual Capitalists, the average sum of unemployment and inflation rates with a Democratic president over the last 70 years is 9% versus 9.5% for Republicans. So about even there. I love this headline because I found this headline and I went, whoa, this is counter to what I've been researching. There's a headline from Newsweek from late October 2024. Investors make much more money when Democrats are in the White House. Research, this is from Newsweek and Charles Schwab. Research conducted by financial services company Charles Schwab detailed a hypothetical investment of $10,000 in the S&P 500 in 1948, which would have grown to $1.2 million by 2023 if only invested when Democrats controlled the House. If they did it when Republicans controlled the White House, if they did it when Republicans controlled, the return would only be $312,000. So, according to that, wow, you're going to get a lot more money if you were invested only during Democrats rather than being invested during Republicans. However, if investors ignored the political affiliation of the president and continually invested throughout this time period, that $10,000 would be worth nearly $38 million in 2023. So this $10,000 investment starting in 1948, only during Republican presidents. You just, as soon as a Democrat gets elected, you pull it out of the market, right? That $10,000 over that period is going to grow to $311,000. If you only did it during a Democratic presidency, it's going to grow to $1.2 million. And if you just stayed invested during the whole damn thing, it's $38 million. That right there sums up exactly what we're talking about.
Pretty much. I mean, in just a perfect example of the garbage that is pumped at us from the quote unquote legacy media. And that's not a, hey, Trump thing. It's just a reality. Like, it's just not true. Right? But it gets pumped at us and we believe it. And then our clients come to us saying, well, I read this and what should I do with my portfolio? And the reality is nothing. You should do nothing. You should stay the course and do exactly what we've been doing and just keep going and go back to the hobbies, because you're not going to win by trying to play the political game. You just won't.
So I found some interesting data on, this is a survey of C-suite executives, CFOs, CEOs of big companies. This is as of September 2024. The PwC Pulse survey. So they survey the CEOs and they say, hey, what do you think? So here are what some of the top executives in the country think are going to happen regardless of who had won. This was taken before the election, obviously, but regardless of who had won, executives expect 61% of the executives surveyed expect a recession in the next 6 months. That's up from 49% in June 2024. So executives, regardless of who wins, are expecting a recession, which is counter to what we've been told. I mean, on our other podcast on the markets, you've been saying soft landing, been saying this recession's done and we've passed it, we're over it. Executives are still expecting it. Do you still expect it?
I think the market's in a cycle, and it always has been in a cycle. Where I question the recession ideology or belief is until the government stops printing money, it's pretty hard to let anything happen. And so I think we have a term called liquidity, right? And liquidity just means how easy is it to get money from governments. Until liquidity slows down, it's hard. I just don't see it. I think that the politicians over the last 20 years have given carte blanche on printing and spending money. And until that spending stops, whether it's Republican or Democrats, it's going to be really hard to watch a recession kick in.
77% of those executives expect an increase in executive orders, and 75% expect more regulation and litigation. And this one blew my mind. So all we think about is the president, right? All we think about when we think about the November or the November elections, we just think president. There's a lot of other stuff on the ballot. And these executives surveyed, when asked which government entities affect their company the most, more than half rank state governments and federal regulatory agencies in the top 3. They were followed by local governments, Congress, all ahead of president. So president is the premier position that everyone focuses on, thinks that this is the person who's the arbiter of the economy and the world. There's a lot of other factors that end up affecting business. And this survey fleshes that out.
Well, I mean, case in point, and I mean to say this very respectfully, but I think we could all agree upon the fact that over the last at least 8 months, it's questionable about who's running this country, right? Because of President Biden's health issues. I think it's very clear, having a father who passed away from Parkinson's and dementia, I watched that process happen, and I see that process. The fact that the economy rolled on, the fact that we still operated just fine, tells you something about how important and unimportant the president of the United States is. Yes, they're important, but there are a lot of other power bases in this country. And it's not just the president gets to do all. We don't have a dictatorship now yet, but let's hope never, right?
Still 2 terms, right? We're still sticking at 2.
We'll see, right?
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Finally, the CEO of BlackRock, someone else who purportedly runs the world, depending on what Reddit forum you're in,
right?
Larry Fink said,
"Careful, you might get delisted from YouTube."
Just even saying that.
Don't say that.
Don't say that. Yeah. He said, "I'm tired of hearing this is the biggest election in your lifetime. The reality is, over time, it doesn't matter." Wow. I mean, that's someone who's very much involved in the market, right?
Yeah.
Someone said they are the market, and even he is not so concerned about it.
Right, exactly. And I think we have to remind ourselves that the world is bigger than any one person, and there are contrary parties that will keep power in check. And we can all hope that democracy continues. As the founder said, a democracy, republic, if you can keep it.
So let's wrap up, and before anyone takes the whole episode out of context, this episode was about the market and the economy.
That's right.
There are changes to come. There are things that will happen that will be disfavorable to some people, and people who are upset about the result of the election may see some of their greatest fears realized.
Yeah.
People who are excited about the election may see a few of those things happen. But the goal of the episode today was to share a little bit of history to show it doesn't always go exactly how you think.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's great measure to take a breath, step back, and just know that In fact, I'll tell this last story and we'll wrap it up. In my last college course in college, I took this class. I had to get these 2 credits at UC Davis. And the only class left was feminism between 1800 and 1900 in Latin America. I'm looking at this class to get these 2 credits, the only one I take to just graduate and be done. I'm like, I got to take this class. I'm like, here I am. I'm like, I don't even speak Spanish. Like, I don't know how I'm going to take this class, but I got to take it. It's the only one I take. So, but it was just a fascinating class, and it studied how women impacted the world throughout history. And what we find is that when people try to break systems, the system will push them back into play. And that what's more powerful than any one individual is the system in which they exist in and live in. And so that women that tried to be revolutionaries and break the systems they were in were quashed by the systems. But women who tried to work within the system and influence the system as it was were very successful. And I think that's really true with any leader. The point is the system is more powerful than any one individual. And the way we create change is subtle influence inside the system. And keep that in mind, that the markets are a system. They're probably the most dominant system in our world. And because they are a system, expect the system to do the system. And if anyone tries to break that system, then guess what? And fortunately, it's been up and to the right. That's the predominant pattern of the markets. So it doesn't do any good to bet with your money on the negative and that the world is falling apart.
If you're new to the show, this is your first time, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We have many more episodes to check out. And if this episode didn't really stick with you, watch it again. Maybe you'll get it the second time. Thanks so much for checking out It's All Money.
This content was produced by Fermata Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. DBA, Sonoma Wealth Advisors. The opinions expressed by Fermata Advisors, LLC on this show are their own. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Viewers and listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance.